The ramifications of the decision on what remains of this season give you a little hint into the thoroughness of the process taking place, and undoubtedly lawyers are involved. It's a test of the AFL's resolve. This essentially is one of Andrew Dillon's foundation planks of his time in the job.
Yes.
He started this crackdown in Gather Round last year, and I would imagine in his mind he would have thought the severity of the penalty would have quashed the issue, but it hasn't. We've had repeat offences, and now that it's all about a premiership favourite on the cusp of finals and a star player, does the AFL have the resolve to follow through?
Well, up to now, there's been no equivocation on it. So it's been one of those few times in this whole, world of tribunal and cases where there seems to be no wriggle room, save for the one game for a self-report. So we'll get into the issue in a moment. What are Adelaide trying to do here? So there'll be no handing down of any verdict today. They've spoken to everyone. We've heard, from his teammate Tex Walker talking about how remorseful he is, and I'd imagine he's going through a pretty difficult time right now. What are Adelaide trying to do here? Because
there's no hearing, it's a legal submission which will go to, so no self-report but contrition, and can they make a resolute case around contrition? The atmosphere of the night and how Izak Rankine found himself in that position, what he was subjected to along the way, that saw him make that moment of misjudgment, and I guess a plea for mercy as well, given where we are in the season. So Adelaide would be derelict in their duty if they didn't go the whole way to try.
Are they preparing this submission now?
No, I think this would be with the AFL now. Okay. I think they would have done that today.
Tell me this, do you think part of that would be along the lines of, 4 or 5 weeks of the home and away is equivalent to 3 of a final series and a potential grand final and premiership?
I imagine they would try everything.
Does it carry weight with you?
No, it doesn't. There's no precedent for it in our judicial system. Nobody has ever been able to go to a tribunal and get a reduction based on a finals worth 2 games.
There has the other way. The AFL have come back to us in years gone by and said, these final series are so big that you will get double penalty.
So in the grand final, if you ruin the spectacle, and Alistair Lynch, this was the ramifications for that.
Evening, Lynchy.
If you ruin the spectacle of grand final day, you'll get hit with double. But it's never been countenanced that you can get less because a final is more significant than a home and away game. No. Oh, I think that's a slippery slope.
I would argue it.
Okay.
I would argue it strongly. I'm not saying it'll get through, but 2 big finals compared to 2 mundane home and awayers. I don't know how you provide the framework, but I would imagine that's part of Adelaide's pitch here. If it's a 4 or 5 week penalty, it's at the absolute extreme end, which it's fair enough. I'm not, again, arguing for Izak. I'm just trying to work out where the Adelaide Crows are going.
So if I ran that more basically to an on-field issue, so in an elimination final, you ran through with a shoulder and you got 3 weeks for causing a concussion, could you get that reduced in a final series?
That's why you're the host, Jared.
I think that's a good point. Because that has even more significant ramifications on the player that you knocked out.
Yeah, that's true. No, that's
where we are with the off-field, and this is where people are saying there's no framework. There is the AFL has a really clear framework here that they have established through basically case law. It's 5 weeks, and if you are able to show self-report, and I don't know what level of contrition the Jack Graham case was able to demonstrate, but the self-report clearly got him 5 to 4. So the starting point here is 5.
Yeah. So the Jack Graham was on the basis that he self-reported voluntarily, and in the self-report, the contrition component comes into it. Now, Izak didn't self-report. The contrition comes in, the phone call to the player, all of that. How much is that going to help him? I'm not sure, but they'll mount the case. It was interesting this morning. We are at the coalface of immediate flinch reaction from our football-loving supporters through Talkback Radio, and it is still mixed in terms of the attitudes to this, to the extremity of a suspension of 4 or 5 weeks for what many deem to be, look, it's just a word, which I've gone past it and got my head around where we need to be at. But there's a lot of people out there that don't, Jared.
So the view put forward by Damien Hardwick and Lee Matthews did have support, is reduce the number of weeks and increase the fine. You can't do that within this season. No. You might choose to reset in the aftermath. But I think that misses how resolute the AFL is to rid the game of this, and I suspect their disappointment that they haven't been able to do so. Now, whether it's naive or not, I think the level of penalty that they chose they would have believed that the players would understand and modify their behaviour. And it would be surprising that they haven't.
Yeah. This is the racial vilification that we fought so hard for as a code to try and be leaders. And it's not to say we're going to get zero tolerance, because we know every now and then it'll raise its head. This is, for me, in the same category, Jared. And you don't... And the education piece I came through with our Indigenous players is you don't know unless you've lived it. And you don't know unless you've lived this from a gay person's point of view. That was some of this messaging. And I'm not being all pious and, you know, trying to lecture anyone on this, but trying to get to some sort of level of understanding of the severity of people hearing that word, as opposed to those that are saying, oh, well, you know, let's try and mitigate that down to two weeks and a big fine. I'm happy and comfortable with a serious suspension for this until such time as we get our head around the fact.
I do think there is that element, whether you agree with it or not, everyone had fair warning.
Yeah,
this hasn't suddenly landed.
There's no question about that. You can't argue you don't know. I mean, because that's been clearly pointed out. And if this is one of the rocks of which Andrew Dillon wants to, you know, base his whole tenure, then good on him. That's not great news for Izak, but if that's what he wants to do, then I support it.
And it couldn't be a more powerful message if it does land here 5 weeks and it takes a star out of a premiership quest.
Jon, you broke the story about Izak Rankine on Sunday night. You brought it to us first on codesports.com.au. Now, I've got here that the verdict has landed, but that is actually not the case, is it? What is the latest there?
Yeah, that's right. So it will go into tomorrow, and there's even a scenario where potentially Adelaide will get what the AFL believes the verdict should be, and then they might have another 24 hours to try and work through that. So Adelaide believes there are compelling extenuating circumstances tonight in regards to why they believe he should serve only a 3-week ban. So I've revealed tonight that their submission is that he was triggered by a war of words with Dan Houston. Now, of course, Dan Houston last year in the showdown knocked him out. Knocked him out cold. He went off on a stretcher. Dan didn't play another game for Port Adelaide. It was a 5-week suspension. Now, the Adelaide version of events is that there was a claim made, whether it was, you know, bring the stretcher out or something in regards to that triggered him. I'm not condoning his language after that. I'm not suggesting that it was an appropriate response for him to utter that homophobic taunt. But the Adelaide view is certainly that it was something that was instructive. Now, Adelaide's also made the case to the AFL today that a home and away suspension is in no way equitable to a final suspension, in fact, a potential full final suspension. They believe the AFL will be well aware of the double standard of hiring Snoop Dogg to perform at a grand final despite his homophobic language, then suspending players for up to 5 weeks. I'm not sure if that's in the submission, but certainly that's something they believe the AFL is aware of. Corbin, people will not like the Houston defence. They will say it's a cop-out. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm inclined to think let's deal with the two issues separately rather than make them one issue. So if he does have an issue in the way that Dan Houston addressed him on field, let's talk about that. But I'm not sure that gives him an excuse to be able to use the language that he has on this particular occasion. I also think the AFL have wedged themselves a little bit in this, that rather than taking an educational model, and they would argue, oh, we do education, we put a module out and everything else. They've decided to take a punitive model, which means if that's what they're going to do, and they say that we'll just keep suspending players until the behaviour corrects, well, the behaviour hasn't corrected. So they really, what other position are they in? To be honest, for whatever it's worth, I could understand if, say, they gave him a 3-match ban and they said, look, 2 of them are finals, so there's a little bit of weighting that goes on that.
You'd be OK with that 3 weeks?
Probably with 2 of them being finals. But again, it's this arbitrary nature that we'll just make it up as we go. And the fact that it's even stretched into a 4th day just suggests that the AFL, as they've done in the past, quite happy just to let it flap in the breeze, see what the reaction is. I actually thought across the footy world last night, everybody was almost lockstep that, hey, you can't do that. We know what the sanction is and we're expecting this kind of an outcome. The only reason that this could be taking so long is for what you've reported tonight. And, that basically there is more negotiation happening there, which probably suggests that it's not as open and shut as what you'd expect it to be.
And Adelaide's really hopeful that delay means that they are taking it seriously, not that they're just showing them, they're trying to give them indication they take it serious and then go 5 weeks anyway. So here, of course, are the suspensions from dating back from April last year. And I think the Adelaide view is that Jeremy Finlayson one, that's 3 weeks. OK, so if you strike someone 16 months ago, you strike someone today, you get 3 weeks. So why is it this escalating, snowballing type model?
Yeah. I agree, and I think the model should be public-facing, and we've had this conversation in the past, but I guess the part I don't understand, and firstly, Izak Rankine's absolutely the number one person responsible for this. He's the one that said it. Secondly, though, I look at the football club, and you hear Brad Scott speak last night on AFL 360 and Zach Merritt this evening, and I thought this is a club that's got a great approach to this issue, that even if you just look at it as a football issue rather than a social issue, if you're a chance at missing a player for 3 weeks, even say it is 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 5 weeks for something like this, if it was a sling tackle or a slam tackle or something like that, they would go on, they'd practice it and they would basically try and correct the behaviour of their players. Have the Adelaide Crows put any time, any extra resources, any extra education around their group since Finlayson, since Collard, since Powell to make sure that this doesn't happen to us? So I wonder sort of how much work they've done behind the scenes, and ultimately they're the ones that are going to miss one of their key players at a big time of the year.
And Izak is in a world of hurt in regards to his own personal circumstances. The club is really putting a lot of support around him. They believe he's just absolutely shattered by it, which is fair enough. So it's a really complicated picture by the AFL. As you say, if it was 3 weeks from round 1 last year, we'll all say that's okay. If this is 3 weeks right now, everyone will say the AFL has gone soft on homophobic language or anti-homophobia. It's a very tough situation for the AFL.